Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Military Transition Wellness, the podcast dedicated exclusively to those transitioning from military service. Today we are talking about resiliency and how to be more resilient as you go through the transition to civilian life. Here to help us do that is Teresa Bitner, a resiliency, change, and loss coach. Welcome to the podcast, Teresa. This podcast is available on multiple platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others. Please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to be informed as new episodes become available. If you enjoyed today's episode or any of our episodes, please rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. As always, check out our website at foodexperienceunplugged.com for some resources as you begin your health journey.
Hey, thank you for having me, Michelle. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Oh, fantastic. Well, to get started, will you take a moment to introduce yourself and why resiliency? Why is that near and dear to your heart?
No, I'd be happy to. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I always think about this as my whole life shouted change, and it was all about building resiliency with change and loss. I didn't really know that at the time. So I grew up in an alcoholic abusive home, and grief and change was kind of a thing. Early on, my grandmothers and great grandmothers died, and I lost parents and not parents, grandparents and aunties to illness. And then in high school there was friends from suicide and accidents, and then as I got older there was more accidents and illness and cancer. And I moved across country. I have two autoimmune diseases, so I thought, you know what, I got this whole thing called change and loss, whatever. So I started out as a career in high tech. I was a software developer, then became a project manager, and that burnt me to a crisp. So I decided to change careers. There was two executives in the house. My late husband and I were trying to do that. Didn't work, so I left and became a middle school science teacher. So that was fun change. But during that time is when I really found out what grief and loss and what resiliency meant. My first husband was killed in a motorcycle accident in my second year of teaching. Tragic. It was horrible. My two sons were in high school, freshman and senior, and it was a really awful time. It's still to this day been the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And it was a long journey, ugly, not pretty, working through grief and trying to figure out what a single mom widow looks like. New science teacher, not making a whole lot of money compared to my high tech, and then just trying to figure out how to get by and not scar my students as well. And the thing that people kept saying is, "Oh, Teresa, you're so strong. You're so resilient." And all I could think about is, I'm not resilient. I'm just merely surviving. This is so hard. But as I kept going through it, people were also saying, "Hey, you need to write a book. You need, show other people you're resilient." So after, working through the grief, through faith, family, and friends, and also good counselor and therapy, I decided, you know what? I do have something special. I am able to bounce back from big changes, losses, stress. So I wanted to be a coach. So I became a coach. And that's how I got into resiliency, starting my coaching business. And as life would have it, as soon as I started my business, my mom started getting sick with congestive heart failure. So I spent the first 2 years of my business going back and forth. I live in Austin, Texas, to Florida, where they were, and dealing with her, and learned more resiliency, working through the whole elder care system from uh, her being in hospice and in rehabs and hospitals and in and outs. And oh, by the way, dad has dementia while we're doing all of that. So that's why I say resiliency is my thing. The other thing is that once I found out about it, I can't stop researching it. I research, I read about it. I love to learn what makes other people resilient and how they live through it. And I'm a true believer that it's, Sheryl Sandberg says something similar to this. We all have resiliency in us. It's like a muscle. So with education and knowledge, you can grow that resiliency.
I
So,
love
and
that.
yeah, and there was more transitions. As a single mom, then I started dating and married my husband, and then we had blended families. My oldest son joined the Army; he's in the infantry, and then the younger kiddo was off in college and decided to join the Army Reserves. So, the military is near and dear to my heart. I wanted to share this with your listeners. Excuse me. There is a free coaching that's available to veterans, and it's called Stand Beside Them. Don't know if you've heard of them, but I'm on the bench and I love coaching. And it's for the folks coming out with their transitions. If they want to start a business or go back to school, because it's a challenging transition for sure.
Absolutely. Now, to kind of just back up for a minute, you
Sure.
went through a lot as a child and
Mhm.
youth. You went through a lot of different events that kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, kickstarted your resiliency, or
Yes.
but yet you mentioned later in life with your first husband's accident that kind of really drove it home. How was that process, and what did you learn back in those early days that really helped you later in life?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I didn't really realize that's when the resiliency journey started until I started looking into it and doing some, my own coaching and therapy with my own coaches and therapists and figuring out like, oh, it's I didn't know that it's living in a chaotic home, of any sort of dysfunction of alcoholism, drug abuse, whatever, and I say all of us have some sort of dysfunction, but learning to live with that and knowing that how to recover and be ready for anything, kind of on that kind of edge of like, oh, be ready, oh, don't do this or dad's going to get mad. And that and it was a happy fun place because it was party happy. It wasn't that type of environment, but it was knowing that I could survive that. Didn't really think about it as a kid. I kind of thought it was normal till I found out it wasn't normal. Like, oh, and how do everybody's house is like this? Oh my gosh, no way. So those early on, and there was some pivotal moments as a kiddo because I got myself into trouble. My teen years, we moved from New York, where I was Little Miss It, to North Carolina, and that was a major transition. It was probably the first transition that it didn't go smoothly. I became what I call a turbulent teen, rubbed people without a clue, and got into all kinds of trouble and making poor choices and having my own drug and alcohol issues there. But there was a turning point, and my dad was like, I'm really scared for you. You're going to end up dead or you're going to be really successful. You get to choose. And I just remember as a kid going, what? Really? I don't know. But it was enough to scare me. And I got in some big enough trouble that I'd also scared straight. That is kind of a thing.
Mm,
So that helped me to realize their choices, and being resilient sometimes is making a choice of which way do I go.
okay, yeah. And then so at later in life, you're able
Hmm.
to kind of reflect on the past and then
Hmm.
choose to become more resilient, essentially.
Yes, yes. Well, and knowing that, and that with my husband's death, I got into it was not pretty. The first few years were ugly. I turned back to alcohol, eating and drinking my way through grief. That's kind of my thing, apparently. Did that, and it was not the home was not a place. It was we were becoming very dysfunctional. I got scared. I knew I was going into a deep, dark place. That's what I called it, and I was like, my gal pals, thank goodness I was in a very supportive school district, and they were like, you need to get some help. You need to get some therapy. I'm like, I don't want to go to the doctor. I don't want to get on pills. I'll become addicted. And they're like, no, it's okay. So that was another choice of which way do I go? Do I,
Mm,
and it scared me to a place I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel good. I want to live again. I want to be happy.
okay. Now, as far on that kind of note of happiness,
Hmm.
how do you navigate that change? What exactly did you
Mm.
kind of develop your own strategy for navigating, or how do you navigate those sometimes unpredictable waters?
Oh gosh, there's so many tips and tidbits about being resilient, but and figuring it out. So one of the first things to do is when you have a major change, and this is what I coach my clients through, is figure out what the losses are from that change. Because even if it's a great change, like, oh, I'm married again, I got a new husband. Oh wait, like I have a new husband and like I can't do whatever I want. I can't just take off. So whenever there's a change, listing the losses as a process I have, because there's losses in that change and they may be really awesome losses and they might not be like, oh, I now have a new routine because I live with another person. Oh, we're going to move houses. That's a good thing. Or is it a good thing? Kind of a thing. And like when I lost my first husband, I wish someone had taken me through that because I realized afterwards that I lost more than a husband. We lived out on a ranch. I didn't know how to open the gate when the power went out. So I remember very vividly railing, with this giant wrench, take me, I don't care, I don't know how to open it. So there, I lost that. I lost my best friend, the guy who knew how to open the gate. And so I have people list those losses so that you can really understand the change and all that you're going through, and then spend some time mourning them in a healthy way, be that journaling, painting, writing, crying, what have you. So by doing that, it helps you process the changes and the losses to move forward. Because once you've done that, then you're in a place to kind of pop your head up and go, okay, what's next? And that is a sign of resiliency. It's looking forward and being able to look forward with some hope. Sometimes it's really hard, but looking for that hope.
Okay, so you're just kind of mulling over or pondering what's
Mhm.
happening, and then saying, okay, that's done, and then moving on.
I wouldn't say it's ever done. Grief and loss is never done. I like to call it, as you move through it, it's a journey. And also not stuffing your feelings. If you're mad, it's okay to be mad. I chopped down a lot of trees when we lived on the ranch because that was the way I got through my anger. Listening to heavy rock and roll or something like that, or healthy ways, screaming and yelling and hitting each other, not healthy ways for dealing with the anger. But with change and loss, working through those feelings. And I think at some point, there comes a point when we're like, okay, this is going to be it. Am I going to be defined by this? Am I going to be a widow and defined like that is my life? Or do I want to live and continue living and do something with my life? And that was, there was a pivotal moment. All these nice, well meaning people are like, go out to dinner with other widows. It was fine. At the time, I was 42. So the military and first responders have great resources for plain people who didn't at that time. Well, not a lot of resources, but there was this one lady I remember, and she was so angry and bitter 15 years after her husband was killed in a very similar way. And she kept dragging her kids to the parole officer meetings. And she was like, I want to see him pay. I want my kids to see him pay. And she was just full of vitriol and angry. And I walked away from that dinner thinking, I don't want to be that. That is not who I want to be. I could see myself being that. So that was kind of a pivotal moment where like, oh, I could see that as a forward path for me, or I didn't know what else. So I was like, okay, God, I don't know what else, but I don't want to be that. I know I don't want to do that. Because it's just, to me, I was just like, oh my God, you're taking your kids to still? And she was still so very angry. And I knew, as you work through grief, the feelings are there, but you can get them to change, get them to lower as you're working through your changes.
Okay. Now on the military transition side, obviously within your military service, you go through a lot of changes, much less transitioning to civilian life. Now, where does resiliency come into play with all that?
Well, it's a big change. It is a big, big change to move from the military life to civilian life, and having coached other veterans through it, even if you have the training, it's still not quite the same because people are different. They're really different. And knowing that, and I would say as you're making that transition, get as much support as you can from whatever military or service you're in. If you have religious or spiritual beliefs, get that. Therapy, counseling, coaching, get support so you don't do it alone. That's one of my sayings. Don't do this alone. You don't have to. Good golly, please don't. A lot of us are like, oh, I can do this. I can just power through it. Yeah, maybe. But get that help because that transition is going to be different, and figuring out maybe a plan A and a plan B and maybe even a plan C, because life might not be what you think. If you were getting out of the military in 2019, you probably didn't see the pandemic coming. That's a big thing. So, and that's some of the things. Putting plans in place and having goals. Military folks are really good at that. They're well trained in that. And those are two really great resiliency skills. Putting together a plan, executing that plan, and having goals and mini goals are some of the best resiliency traits you can have to help you move through it.
Okay. Now, you mentioned as far as resiliency traits. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. And there's different schools of thoughts. Some people are born with more, and I think some of it is more the environment you grew in. I did not know being used to change because some people are change averse and some people are not. I wasn't change averse. I was like, change. Yep, great. Let's do it. Didn't know why. Oh, I lived in constant state of change. Oh, maybe that's why change isn't scary to me. So knowing that change isn't a bad thing, that it can actually be an opportunity, that's one of the key things to look for. Is what's the opportunity in this situation, even when it's the crummiest. I never forget driving home from the hospital with my mom. It's raining and dark in Florida, and I'm crying. And all I could think about, and I was brand new coach. I could hear my coach saying, "What's the opportunity in this?" And I'm just like, "There's no opportunity." Blah, blah, blah. And I thought, no, there is an opportunity. I'm learning about the elder care system and healthcare system in America. It stinks. So I kind of chuckled to myself, like, well, that's really morose. But it was. It was something like, okay, I can see there's an opportunity. Or what am I learning by this? As something to ask yourself. Oh, I'm learning how to learn a new skill. New skills are another great resiliency characteristic. So there's lots of different things that you might not think are resilient characteristics that you may or may not already have. So there's lots. I can keep listing them if you want me
to. Sure. Are there any that you feel are particularly relevant to the military transitioners?
Change is an opportunity. I think the other thing, and you may have, you've been through lots of changes already. You went through the military, good gravy. And the other thing is that It's just a season of life. It's not forever. Whatever the situation is, be it, really awesome or really not awesome, it's a season of life. So kind of, can you deal with, okay, this is the season of life I'm in. Here's how I deal with it. And then what, and looking forward to the next season of what do I want next? And how do I get there? And putting those steps in place, getting that resources. Like I said before, learning new things. During the pandemic, a lot of people didn't know they were tapping into resiliency by learning new things. That is a great thing to do to keep our minds and bodies fresh. The other thing is with your great military training, stay healthy. Keep that PT going. Um, Having, a healthy lifestyle, as healthy as you can, exercise, eating well, sleeping well, those are all resiliency traits, because if you're not feeding your body, you're not going to be able to go through life as well as you could.
Excellent. Good point. Now,
Mm-hmm.
with you mentioned with your kids in the military, they're still in the military, but
Mm-hmm.
do you see resiliency traits being formed
Awesome.
even while they're in the service?
Interesting. Yeah, the younger son is out. He did his 4 years and is out. The older one is still in there. Developing resiliency traits. I think getting used to, my older son's been active duty for it'll be 8 years. And getting used to just, okay, here's your orders, go, do, change, move. Um, I think that's a resiliency trait that you get. I mean, you figure out how to deal with the changes one way or another. Um, and I think the other thing that the military does a really nice job, they do resiliency training. I actually know that because it was, yeah, anyway, long story. But yes, they do resiliency training in the military, but also they give you the traits to learn, to plan, to set goals, know how to execute those goals, do whatever it is you're doing. So those are traits that are being formed, as well as I think with the military, especially if you're deployed overseas, you learn a more global view of the world. So you're not so myopic and, this is my little town that I grew up in, everybody in my whole family lives there. You get a different view of life. And I think that really helps with your resiliency, that there are many ways to do things, many ways to live different ways.
Okay. Now, on that note of many ways to learn, are there some examples of resilience with your own clients that you can tell us about in terms
Oh,
of how they've navigated those waters and what they've learned about resiliency?
sure. One of the best examples is I had a client and she was in an abusive relationship, but that's not why she came to me for coaching. She came to get a new job. So often people come for career coaching and things like that. But through that, it's like, okay, you're not meeting your goals. You keep running up against things. What's going on? Oh, you're in an abusive relationship. That's not cool. I told her as a coach, I'm like, I know that's not what I'm coaching you about, but that is not okay. Abusive relationships not okay ever, ever, ever. So we worked on boundaries, having good, healthy boundaries. And that is a resiliency trait that some people are really good at, some people aren't. It's one you can grow. And boundaries to me mean saying yes to what you want to and no to what you don't want to. And that one is a tricky one for folks in the military because they're used to taking orders. Once you get out of the military, you don't have to say yes to everything. I encourage you not to, actually. So, and I put a little corollary on that, saying yes to what you want, no to what you don't want to, and mitigating toxic people or situations in your life. And for this gal, her situation was the abusive boyfriend, which she eventually got rid of. She's doing phenomenal. Life is awesome. So that's one of the ones that comes to mind. And one of the military veterans that I coached, he got out and he was going to school. Some things happened. He stopped going to school and was just really demotivated, just like, oh, I'm going to be in this crummy job for the rest of my life, blah, blah, blah. So he found out about Stand Beside Them. They matched me with him, and I worked with him, coaching him through, okay, what's going horrible in your life right now? What do you want? He's like, I really just want to go back to school. So it took a while to get him to see, oh, you can't go back to school. Yeah, start over. It's not too late. You're 30 something. Okay. You can still go back to school. So some of it is encouragement. That's what great coaching can help you do. And finding out that, you know what, hey, I can go back to school. It doesn't have to be full time. Take a course here, take a course there. So, and he's trucking right along. He's not done with school yet, but we are still connected, and he's making some good progress. And for him to see and have someone that quote was on his side that was encouraging him, was kind of all it needed to say, oh, I do have a path. Oh, help me make some plans. Help me hold me accountable. Like, hey, did you sign up for classes? I know it's coming up. So those are two
Okay.
nice cases.
Yes, definitely. Now, with that, particularly with the second example, it sounded like those aspects or those traits of resiliency were there, and you were there just as, of course, as a coach, but to really bring out those things, or at least make him aware of the traits that he did have.
Yeah, I like to call it coaching holds up a mirror and it's really cloudy and dirty. And through coaching, we kind of clear it off and go, hey, look, remember, this is how awesome you are. These are your awesome traits. And that, and he had some things go on and some things happen that kind of, kicked him down. So that's one of my things on my website, is life ripped the rug out from under you. It happens. And sometimes we forget. And oh gosh, after my mom died, I was like, okay, I don't even know if I can do this business anymore, blah, blah, blah. I was in a down place. Luckily, my coach is like, okay, yes, you can still coach people even though you're grieving. That's the thing. And I got, I took some courses on how to run a business, and here I am. So 8 years later going, wow, I'm still running my coaching business. This is awesome.
Yeah. Now, through all of this, what have you learned more about resiliency, or do you feel you're more resilient because of these things?
That's a yes to both. Yes, I'm more resilient because I practice it, I learn it, and I give workshops on it. So I have to keep up with the science. I'm very much into positive psychology, Martin Seligman's work on positive psychology, and that's a piece of it. Is remaining positive. I've learned more about it myself, and I continue to learn. I just love, people say, "Hey, have you read this book? This is a great resiliency book." So I'll read it, and I've learned more about trauma, PTSD as well, just so I can serve people well, and knowing, what does that look like? How do we move through it? How does one find resiliency when we're in a super, super tough place? Because it can be hard. I don't want to downplay it and like, oh, everybody can just look at the opportunity and move through it. No, sometimes it takes a team of people, your therapist, your doctors, things like that, to help you move through it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, with as far as that whole process of resiliency, do you feel are there you learn a lot through your experiences? Do you feel like people have inherent resiliency traits? Is it a mixture of that as well as whatever life experiences throw at you?
I think so. And it's the glass half full or glass empty. Are you an Eeyore or are you Tigger? Ti double gut. I mean, that was my nickname as a kid. I did not understand, but as I've thought about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I always was kind of the bouncy, happy kid, no matter what was going on. So I think that's an inherent trait we have. But even if you're an Eeyore, and I've worked with lots of Eeyores, there are ways to still find some resiliency, looking for that opportunity. Taking a class. Another great thing about the military that I forgot, it's a great resiliency trait, is a network. Having a network of people, be that, your workout buddies, the platoon you're in or what have you, your church groups, your neighborhoods, your family, your friends. So all of that, having a great network of people, because it's been sometimes when I've been kind of what I call, quote, lost or down, that friends or family have been like, hey, what's going on? Like, hey, this isn't you. Go get some help, or let me help you, or let's talk. So that's super key as well.
Okay.
Having a good supportive network.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. Now with that, are there other I guess what's the first step for those either transitioning now or thinking about it, or maybe even recently transitioned, as far as how they can kind of grow their resiliency, or I guess learn about resiliency that they may have in them already?
Sure. A great thing to do is to some kind of list out your strengths. What are you awesome at? What are your strengths? What are you really good at? What have people told you you're good at? Another way to find out your strengths is what comes super easy for you that you could just do forever and time slips away. Those are some of your strengths. There's also, you can do like Strengths 2.0. There's books out there. There's the VS Strengths Finder. I don't know what the military does for strengths, but I hope they have things. So remembering your strengths. And then another thing is listing the resources. Are they actual physical resources like, hey, I own a car? Or are they, oh, I have this friend who got into finance, or, my aunt is knows about this. So making a list of your strengths and then the resources you have to tap into. And another thing is remembering when you had a really hard time, a really hard change. Maybe it was for the Army guys, boot camp, basic, what have you, and how hard that was. You got through it. So what helped you get through that? What skills helped you get through that? Because you obviously have gotten through it. There was you survived somehow or another. I don't know. I look at it and go, I don't think I could do that. But go into that deep gut way that you persevered through the changes, and that perseverance that you've learned through your military training is a great resiliency thing to tap into when you get out. Like, okay, maybe you want to go back to school, maybe you want to start your own business, maybe you're going to retire, who knows? But thinking about those, your resources and your skills and strengths, as well as things you've been through before, that can help you remember, oh, last time when this happened, I did blank. That's how I got through this. So how can I get through this next stage? It's kind of a long answer for your question.
No, that's perfect. Oh, so a mixture of, okay, reflecting on the past. You mentioned having a network of people.
Yeah.
Any other aspects of wellness in terms of kind of building that resiliency that come to mind?
Oh yeah, as far as a wellness perspective, self-care. I know it's touted a lot, and it's not necessarily bubble baths and chocolate mani-pedis, which, hey, if that's your thing, do that. And good self-care can just look like, hey, I'm more introverted than most people. I need some quiet downtime. Take that for yourself. For me, it's getting out in nature, like trees and water. That's my go-to. So knowing how to take really good care of yourself so that, you can, if your cup's not full, you can't give or do from an empty cup. So filling that cup up, whatever that might be, taking some time off, taking a vacation. Hey, you're out of the military now. What have you always wanted to do? Can you do it? Try it. And just taking really, really good care of yourself. Obviously, eating well, exercising. I'm a big meditator and yoga prayer person. Those can be really, really fulfilling to your heart because your body, mind, and soul make up who you are. So finding that wellness and remembering, like, what does wellness even look like? That's a great journal. I'm a journaler, but I call myself an infrequent journaler. Journaling can be a great way. Like, what does well-being even look like for me? That was one of my things this year. Is like, I want good well-being. Well, what does that look like? I have 3 autoimmune diseases. What's realistic? So coming up with that, what that means to you, and how to get those things, find them, be them whatever they are. And if you have injuries from your military service, because lots of people do, just from all the work that you do, is, how can you take good care of them? Is it through medicines? Is it through the VA? Is it alternative practitioners? I have a whole team that helps me with my autoimmune disease. I just saw my acupuncturist yesterday. I have a chiropractor. I get regular massages, and I see my Western doctors. So things, how can you take the best care of you so that you can be the best you going forward and continue?
Excellent. I love that. Just taking care of you so you can kind of move on with the next phase of your life too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, are there any kind of, I don't know, words of wisdom or tips that for those transitioning to kind of build their resilience, capitalize on it?
Yeah. And if you're listening to the podcast, that's number one. You're thinking about what does resiliency and wellness look like? Yay, good for you. And really thinking about, okay, I'm transitioning. What do I want? And I love the idea of dreaming about it. Have that dream and remember why you have the dream. Take a note of that. And then what baby step, just like what real small step can you take to move towards that dream? And it's all about the small steps because it's a marathon called life, not a sprint. You don't have to do it fast. And it doesn't matter what the journey, even if it's twisty turny, looks like, you can get there. And don't go it alone. That's my other thing. And do the best that you can and know what's enough.
Fantastic. Well, Teresa, how can people get in contact with you?
Yes, there's a couple. The best way is, well, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook and on Instagram. It's Teresa, no H, Teresa Bitner, Bitner, /372, I think, on Facebook and Instagram. My website is really long name, boldfulfilledlifecoach.com. It's really long, so I'll spell it for you. It's boldfulfilledcoach.com. So boldfulfilledlifecoach.com. You can find me there. You can contact me. I've got free downloads, free resources for things like that. And I am going to do a quick plug of my memoir that talks about the death of my husband and the journey we went through. It's called Soul Love, How a Dog Taught Me to Breathe Again. And it is the journey when Chris got killed in a motorcycle accident, how me and the boys, how ugly it got. It's a real raw, visceral story of grief, what it really looks like. It's not sugar-coated. There's, as my sister said, there's swearies in there. I'm like, yeah, I'm from New York. There's F-bombs. Of course there is. But the dog talks about the yucky stuff that I'm embarrassed about talking about, how yucky it got. And it is a story of hope and resiliency for all of us, because we all made it through that. We're doing well again. So that's the first memoir. The next one is under wraps. We're getting working on it.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I applaud you for sharing that memoir with the rest of us, to really understand your journey and to learn resilience, whether through something horrific like that or other aspects of life. Thank you so much for all that you're doing with Resiliency, Teresa. We really appreciate you taking time today to be on the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having me, and I wish everybody the best.